What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at about, I believe, 70 different attackers to copy with Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team in the expanded format. This is a compilation of all of the EXs, GXs, and Mega EXs that I found when looking through all of the cards in expanded that I could see being viably put into Mew 3 decks. So some of them have some obvious lesser potential than the others, but I wanted to put together this list, and I have put it into a deck on PTCGO that you can import to PTCGO for yourself if you would like to have this list to refer back to when building decks with Mew 3 in it. So you can see if you're forgetting about considering any possible attackers. But yeah, we'll just start at the top of this, and I will do my best to give explanations for why I think all of them could be viable. Of course, with Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX in the expanded format. So first we have Lugia-GX, and it's here for its Lost Purge GX. It's just a nice utility to have. Put your opponent's active Pokemon and all cards attached to it in the Lost Zone. Of course, before getting further into this, I would like to mention that I need you to remember we have Dimension Valley, the stadium that allows Psychic Pokemon in play to attack for one colorless less, and Mew 3 can use the attacks of any Pokemon on your bench, any Pokemon EX or GX on your bench or in your discard. So copying something like Lost Purge would only cost 2 colorless if a Dimension Valley was out. And also something to note, you'll notice I'm talking about a lot of utility GX attacks in this video as opposed to big one-hit GX attacks, which is, I think, indicative of how the expanded format is going. There's a lot of disruptive GX attacks or more strategic GX attacks in expanded instead of standard where it feels like we just have blow up the active Pokemon. So yeah, Lugia-GX Lost Purge GX is a nice utility. If there's, a certain matchup or something you're playing with your Mewtwo deck and there's a huge threat that you would like to Lost Zone at some point in the game and you don't need a GX attack in that matchup as well, you could use this one. A lot of these cards I'm talking about as well are going to be things you have to feel out for yourself while you're playing. Obviously, I don't think any of us are going to have time to test every single one of these in a Mewtwo deck between now and Richmond Regionals, which is November 2nd and 3rd. So again, just another reason why I thought this list could be helpful. Next we have Moltres and Zapdos and Articuno Tag Team. For its Sky Legends GX attack, shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck. If this Pokemon has at least one extra Fire, Water, and Lightning energy attached to it, this attack does 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. So with a Dimension Valley, Mew 3 could copy this for just the Fire, Water, Lightning. And if your opponent had 3 Shaman EXs on the board, you could do 110 to all 3 of them. Or if you had damaged a lot of things with, say, Lost Distortions or Distortion Doors from Giratina earlier on. So this one's definitely much more fringe, but again, if there's a specific matchup where they have a lot of Shamans on the board, or you can actually get down 3 Prisms or 3 units, or you have some other type of energy acceleration to make Sky Legends GX work, go for it. Next is Pidgeot-EX. This was one of my last inclusions for Mirror Move. If this Pokemon was damaged by an attack to your opponent's last turn, this attack does the same amount of damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So Mirror Move was much weaker on Pidgeot-EX since it was just 170 HP. But since Mewtwo has 270 HP, and you can put a Fighting Fury Belt on it, that means Mewtwo has 310 max HP. It can get hit by something for 300 damage, and then you just Mirror Move that back. And you can even Max Potion your Mewtwo and still Mirror Move, unlike Damage Change, which we'll see Damage Change in a bit. But I think Mirror Move has some actual potential in Mewtwo decks, especially if you're running healing. Mega Audino, another one of the fringe inclusions, but you have to keep in mind that Magical Symphony can be used for just a DCE if you have Dimension Valley. So it does 110, and if you played a supporter card from your hand during this turn, this attack does 50 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So I think bench damage and spread damage is really, really fun and completely viable and expanded in Mewtwo decks because of the the Distortion Door with Tina and Mega Guardy combo. If you get off a bunch of Distortion Doors early, then Despair Ray, and then you can just clean up multiple Pokemon at once. So this was a considerably viable, or at least not horrible attacker for spread that I wanted to include as a choice. Mega Rayquaza, I've seen this included in the Handlock variants where you're using DCEs because Emerald Break could be copied for just a D-Valley and DCE. It does 30 damage times the number of your bench Pokemon. Pretty simple, but it can really do a lot of damage with a Skyfield and a full bench. That's 240 damage for just a DCE and a D-Valley. Darkrai-GX is included for its Dead End GX. If you have 2 Prism energies or 2 Rainbows and you have a D-Valley, and then you go Laser, Hypnotoxic Laser, effect with the mode Poison, you can instant knock out anything with Dead End GX. So another really cool kind of utility GX attack, but it's also kind of just a one-shot GX attack. But I like Dead End GX more than what we have in Standard right now. I've been really enjoying Expanded with all the utility and like different kinds of GX attacks we have. Yveltal-GX, another kind of knockout condition type GX attack. Doom Count GX for just a single Dark. If your opponent's active Pokemon has exactly 4 damage counters on it, that Pokemon is knocked out. So another example of how the damage spread kind of mechanic could work with the Giratina's Distortion Doors and maybe moving that damage around with an Absol or a Grimsley or something, and then just instant knockout for a single energy is pretty cool. Honchkrow-GX, this is getting a little bit of hype in its own deck and also in Mewtwo decks for its unfair GX attack. Your opponent reveals their hand, discard 2 cards from it. That could be used for either a DCE or just a single energy with Dimension Valley, of course. Unfair GX is pretty cool, but it's kind of degenerate and expanded since you can go Let Loose or Red card, and then Mars and Chip Ice Axe and Unfair GX, and if you knocked out your Mismagiuses that turn, then you can go Lieutenant Surge double Mars and unfair them down to 0 cards, or 1 card after they draw for Mismagius. That depends if you red card before or after. But yeah, Unfair GX is very, very strong. It doesn't necessarily knock anything out, but Unfair GX could just render your opponent's game unplayable. And Featherstorm, if they do get set up after Unfair GX, 90 and 30 to 2 of your opponent's GX and EX. Not bad at all, and again, talking about that damage spread mechanic. Zoroark-GX, Riotous Beating, can be copied for just a single energy, or it can be copied for a DCE. I think it's not a bad inclusion. I've seen it included in the Handlock variants, I believe, as another attacker aside from Emerald Break in case you only have a single energy in a D-Valley instead of a DCE in a D-Valley. So just swinging moderate damage turn after turn after you've applied a considerable lock on your opponent is fine, because you want to just get your opponent down to an unplayable draw pass state, and then you just keep swinging until you win. Garchomp and Giratina tag team. I've added this into my Mega Gardevoir variant because a one-hit knockout is something that deck was kind of missing in my opinion. Its linear attack for 40 is also really cool because you can just use that for a D-Valley and no energy. You're usually not going to get to GG end because you would need 3 energy attachments for that. Calamitous Slash is really why I included it in the Mega Gardevoir variant of Mewtwo anyway, because you can just Distortion Door a bunch of things. When something comes up with 1 damage counter, you can just do a whole bunch of damage, because like I said, the problem I was having with that variant was actually getting one-hit knockouts if I really needed them. Hydreigon EX, this one is just kind of very fringe. If there's any stadium card in play, the retreat cost of each of your dragon Pokemon in play is double colorless less. So maybe if you're playing some sort of Dark Dragon Mewtwo deck, or just dragons in a Mewtwo deck, this could help, but it's also here because, to note, it's Shred attack. This attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon, and Shred is also, Shred's the kind of attack you might want to include, but there's plenty of attacks like Shred, and some of them are better, but this one also has the Dragon Road ability to offer if you wanted to bench it. Latias-EX, prevent all effects of attacks including damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon with abilities. So this could be its an attacker on its own in a Mew 3 deck. But it also has Barrier Break. This attack's damage isn't affected by weakness resistance or other effects on the defending Pokemon. So you could use it as its own attacker potentially if you really wanted to. Or just a wall with Breakdown, or you can copy the Barrier Break. So again, there are attacks like Barrier Break that are better, but if you wanted the potential to also use its ability, then Latias-EX could be included. Palkia-GX is something I've seen in some Archie's lists, and Archie's lists are running 2 Mewtwo and Mew tag team as far as I've seen, and it's kind of become a Mewtwo deck. Like, you are attacking with Mewtwo more often than not in that archetype now, at least in most builds that I have seen. I don't personally like Zero Vanish GX, but that doesn't mean it's not a choice. It can definitely be good if you're playing against like a Turbo Dark deck and they have 9 energy on the board. Zero Vanish that, and you've definitely set them back a considerable amount. Same against Rayquaza-GX decks. So Zero Vanish GX definitely a possibility, but it's not my choice of a GX attack when playing Archies. Altaria-GX. This one has 2 really good attacks. It has Bright Tone 50 during your opponent's next turn. Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon GX and EX. So it has a swing for a little bit of damage and wall attack, and then Sonic Edge goes through wall effects. This damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So just like the Shred attacks we looked at earlier, this is another choice for that. Noivern-GX has 3 good attacks actually. Distort 50, and then your opponent can't play any item cards from their hand next turn. Sonic Volume 120, and they can't play any special energy cards from their hand next turn. And then Boom Burst GX, it does 50 to each of your opponent's Pokemon. So this card has been getting included in every Mega Guardy variant of Mewtwo that I've seen, and for good reason. It has 3 great attacks. Gardevoir and Sylveon, I've seen this included here and there. I am personally not a fan, but Kaleidostorm 150 and then move energy so you can conserve energy if you know your Mewtwo's getting knocked out. Conserving energy usually isn't a problem because when I'm winning a game with a Mewtwo deck, it's kind of been a steamroll. I've either been winning from the start and keep that win, or I've been losing from the start and I just don't get going. But Kaleidostorm meets somewhere in the middle and gives you an out to a closer game that you can conserve your energy, get knocked out, and then come back swinging with a new Mewtwo that's ready to go. Gardevoir-GX is another fairy Pokemon, another Gardevoir. Its Infinite Force is not terrible, especially if you're fighting against another Mewtwo. It does 30 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon, so if you have 3 and your opponent has 3, that's 180. It's not too shabby. And then Twilight GX is also a nice utility GX attack. This is probably one of the weaker cards that I've seen included, but I do understand why it's there. Aerodactyl-GX I've included for its Wild Dive GX attack for just a single energy, and of course most Mewtwo decks are playing Rainbows or Prisms or both. This attack does 50 damage times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So versus something like Archies, if they go in with a Wailord and Magikarp tag team, those things have a ton of energy on them usually, so Wild Dive can do a whole bunch of damage there. Lucario-GX is included for its Cantankerous Beatdown GX. This attack does 30 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So Mewtwo can be at a max of 310 damage with Fighting Fury Belt. You can do a whole bunch of damage with Cantankerous Beatdown GX. Lycanroc-GX is included for its dangerous Rogue GX. For a single energy and Dimension Valley, you can use it, and it does 50 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So without a Skyfield, that's coming up at a max of 250, but with Skyfield, that can do a max of 400 damage. So for just a single energy, I think that could be a fine inclusion if you're looking for a GX attack that takes a one-hit knockout sometimes. Ho-Oh-EX kind of use, but so it would go, you battle compress 3 different kinds of basic energy cards, you rebirth Ho-Oh onto your bench with those energy cards, then you Ninja Boy Ho-Oh into a Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX. That Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX now has 3 basic energy attached to it, and you can even go into something like the Articuno Ultra Zapdos Tag Team that I talked about earlier. And you would have all the energy needed for that. So this is definitely a more fringe kind of inclusion and very different than the others. And you could use Rainbow Burn, but it's probably not your best attack option. Houndoom-EX, I've seen this in some mill variants, just to use Melting Horn, discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. And then, of course, you have the Charizard-GX GX attack that we'll be getting to, or the Magcargo-GX attack that's for a lesser effect for a lesser cost. I think Mewtwo Mill can be pretty viable. It's one that I have to still test, but I've seen it a little bit, and I do think it has some merit to it. Reshiram and Charizard-GX. This is common to Mewtwo decks in Standard, so you might be familiar. It's also common to Reshizard decks in Standard, so it's a card that I'm sure a lot of you already know about. But Flare Strike 230 for 3 energy and a D-Valley is really, really good. I don't think this is as great in Expanded as it is in Standard, though, because like I said, Expanded seems to have more strategic attacks than just brute force. Turtonator-GX, really, really weak inclusion, but still something to mention here. It's Shell Trap for 20, and then during your opponent's next turn, if this Pokemon is damaged by an attack, put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So maybe something like where you're planning to Shell Trap with a belt on, and then use Pidgeot-EX's Mirror move next turn to fully knock them out. This is a really defensive strategy. I'm not sure if it could work or would work, or if you should even try it, but it's definitely has some sort of potential. Shell Trap could definitely be viably used in a tournament setting, so that is why it's included. Alolan Marowak-GX is actually really, really good. Before its Lost Boomerang GX attack, the attack is free, and it does 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. This damage isn't affected by weakness or resistance. If a Pokemon is knocked out by this damage, put that Pokemon and all cards attached to it into the Lost Zone instead of the discard pile. So this is in the Mega Gardevoir lists. You just go Distortion Door a bunch of times and Lost Boomerang 2 Zoruas, a Zorua, a Ditto, Trubbishes, Sableyes, whatever it is. It's really good against Sable Garb, and it's good against Zoroark decks, anything that wants to evolve, really. Magcargo-GX, the Lava Flow can do a considerable amount of damage, but Burning Magma is also good. If you don't think you can get up to 3 energy for the discard with Charizard, then Burning Magma is okay, and if you also want the added attack value from Lava Flow, but this is mostly going to be outclassed by Charizard-GX and Expanded. And here's Charizard-GX. Raging Out is the reason it's here. Discard the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck. You can do this with just 2 energy and a Dimension Valley, or of course like a Rainbow and a DC, Prism DC, or 3 energy. But discarding the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck is kind of insane, and this is like the bread and butter to the mill variant with Houndoom. This Charizard-GX is just one of those brute force GX attacks I have been mentioning. Flare Blitz for 300. You could do Flare Blitz for 300 for 2 Rainbow or 2 Prism or 2 Fire and a colorless, and then a Dimension Valley. So 3 energy in a Dimension Valley can do 300. Absolutely nuts. You can go turn 1 Welder, attach Dimension Valley, Flare Blitz, GX 300 damage. Kind of really insane, and I hope this does not happen to me a lot at Richmond Regionals. Celebi, definitely a more fringe utility kind of card. For its Pollen Hazard, 50, your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned, confused, and poisoned. There's definitely points in games where you might want to disrupt your opponent a bit by confusing them, and then also adding this annoying chip damage that's happening over time if they don't retreat out of the poison. Evergreen GX you could do for 4 energy and a D Valley. Heal all damage and also shuffle all cards from your discard pile into your deck, but that would probably be counterintuitive in a Mewtwo deck, so probably only including this if you want to use Pollen Hazard. Pheromosa and Buzzwole Tag Team GX is going to be included mostly for Beast Game GX. If your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this attack, take 1 more prize. The secondary effect I don't think will happen in a Mewtwo deck, but Beast Game GX to take 1 extra prize could be really good, especially versus single prize decks. If you feel like Cross Divide isn't getting you there and you think that the game is winnable if you can just take an extra prize card, then maybe Beast Game GX is the way to go there. Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor. So this Tag Team GX is getting hype for its Super Growth ability, which is a really cool free attack. Search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your grass Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve. If that Pokemon is now a Stage 1, search your deck for a Stage 2 and evolve it. So this can get out Vileplume Ancient Origins out on your first turn attacking. You can copy this with Mewtwo and Mew, or you can just use Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor itself to do it. But it's better to use Mew, because then after you use Super Growth, you can start copying whatever attacks from your discard you would like, and your opponent is item locked. Essentially, you're both item locked, but if you are playing Vileplume, you would build your deck in a way that the item lock hurts you a minimal amount, while hopefully disrupting your opponent to a greater extent. Virizion-EX is included here for mostly its Verdant Wind ability. Each of your Pokemon that has any grass energy attached to it can't be affected by any special conditions, but if you were to want to accelerate grass energy in a sort of grass build, I believe Purple Cliff on his YouTube has a grass variant of Mew 3 built. Emerald Slash could be a solid attack for an energy and a D Valley. Mega Beedrill EX, another fringe inclusion to this list, but it's a really cool Mega Pokemon with a pretty powerful attack. Hazard Sting for 2 grass, it does 40, discard all energy attached to this Pokemon. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed and poisoned, and the poison does 4 damage counters between turns. So it does 80 in paralyze. You can increase that poison with some other kind of abilities and things that modify special condition damage. But if, let's say, you're using this in the item lock deck with Vileplume, it might be harder for them to get out of the paralysis and poison, so it might be a little better. Again, a fringe card that can be used in a fringe situation, but it is something interesting, and I would like to see this brought into competitive viability with Mew 3. Mega Sceptile EX, I believe this is what the Purple Cliffs Mew 3 grass variant is all based around, the one I was mentioning earlier. For Jagged Saber, for grass colorless or grass Dimension Valley, does 100, and then you can attach up to 2 grass energy cards from your hand to your benched Pokemon in any way you like, and you heal the Pokemon that energy were attached to. So you can essentially cycle between different Mew 3s and healing them each turn with this. Really, really cool strategy that I like, and again, it's something I'm glad to see Mew 3 bringing all of these different strategies to light. Mega Venusaur EX, another grass Mega Pokemon. That's 3 in a row, I think. With an attack that in the past was never used, but I think Crisis Vine could be viable, especially in an item lock or a deck or a energy acceleration strategy, or anywhere where you're disrupting your opponent to get to 3 energy, because 3 energy for 120 paralyzed poison could be really good if your opponent's also item locked, or you've ran them out of resources in some other way. Again, a fringe attack for sure, but something that's definitely more usable than ever was before because of Mew 3. Serena GX, Queen's Command's kinda nuts. Grass, colorless, or grass, Dimension Valley with Mew 3. Your opponent discards 4 flipping cards from their hand. So this could just be let loose Queen's Command. Your go, buddy. Kind of nuts. I definitely think someone's going to try to make this work. So kudos if it's you. I think Queen's Command GX is nuts with Mewtwo. Jolteon-EX can be used for its Flash Ray 70, then prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic Pokemon. So you essentially just wall out Ray and Turbo Dark decks that don't have a way around Flash Ray. Raichu Alone Raichu. This is here for its Tandem Shock. Paralysis is much worse and expanded because of Versus Seeker for Guzman, Versus Seeker for Acerola, and basic EXs that stop special conditions. But if there was a reason you thought Paralysis was good in your deck, like you have Silent, not Silent Labs because of Mewtwo, but you have something that is stopping those effects from working, or you're item locking them, or disrupting them, something in a way where Paralysis would be more effective, then potentially Tandem Shock could be good, but Expanded just usually makes special conditions a lot weaker than they are in Standard. Xurkitree GX, this could be used as its own attacker because of Flashing Head that prevents damage done to this Pokemon by Pokemon that has special energy attached, but it could also be used copied by Mewtwo and Mew for 1 less energy with Dimension Valley to use Rumbling Wires 100 and discard the top card of your opponent's deck if you wanted to be milling your opponent and doing damage, or just have that mill option if your opponent's getting to a low deck later on and you want to do damage. Maybe this can come as a surprise to your opponent and they'll actually have less turns left than they thought they did. Lighting GX also isn't terrible, but it's just so much weaker than a lot of the other GX attacks in Expanded. Magearna is here for its ability, so I know it's not an attacker. You could use Soul Blaster, copy for 120 for 2 energy, but it's not really that great. It's really here for its ability. I know I said that these cards will be things that you're copying with Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team, and you can copy this attack with Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team, but the ability is just really, really important, and I did want to get this one in there. It's essentially stopping, well, let me read it for you guys. Prevent all effects of your opponent's attacks except damage done to each of your Pokemon that has any metal energy attached to it. So you have your Rainbow or your Prism and it counts as metal. And then Eradicate, which puts your opponent's active Pokemon down to 1 damage counter of health left. That would not work with the Mystic Heart ability affecting your Mewtwo. Dead End GX from or is it Dark End GX from Darkrai-GX? It might be Dead End. I'm not sure. We went over that like 20 minutes ago. The one on Restoration Darkrai-GX, that if your opponent's affected by a special condition, they're knocked out. That would not work either with Mystic Heart. So I think this is something really important to keep in mind if you think you're going to see those kind of attacks at Richmond or Portland, that Magearna can really save your Mewtwo's. Mega Scissor. I think this is cool. A lot of these cards, hear me out, I'm going off of I think this is cool, but they wouldn't be here if I also didn't see some sort of potential in them. Iron Crusher for 2 energy, 120, and then you may discard a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon or a stadium card in play. There are decks that rely on special energy very heavily. Mewtwo decks rely on special energy very heavily. If you're not one-shotting each other in the Mewtwo matchup, you could just start running them out of special energy before they do it to you. This could be good against a Toad variant. It could be good against Sableye Garbodor because they run 2 to 3 Rainbow energy. or even if you wanted to remove your Dimension Valley so your opponent couldn't use it to their advantage next turn, something like that. A Fringe attack, but it's from a Mega Pokemon, and this attack was more powerful than a basic Pokemon would have had back in its day. Now it's kind of at the same level, but you can use it from the discard pile. It's a Mega Pokemon, and I'd love to see some more of these Mega Pokemon get utilized. Alakazam EX and Mega Alakazam are kind of a package deal here. Suppression is not bad. Put 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has energy attached to it. That's not bad at all. And then Zen Force does 30 more damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. Again, not bad at all. Kinesis, though, when you play Mega Alakazam EX from your hand to evolve this Pokemon, you may put 2 damage counters on your opponent's active and then 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That's an evolution putting 5 damage counters down. Of course, you have to use Spirit Link to make this happen without your turn ending. I have seen some people experiment with this. It's definitely something viable. Do I think it's best deck in format? Absolutely not, but I do think it has some competitive merit to it. Chandelure EX, Curse Drop before damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like. Curse Drop is kind of like Tina Chomp Tag Team's first attack, linear attack, but that does 40 damage, just does 4 damage counters, so this gets around the Mews and bench barriers of the like. Espeon and Deoxys GX, I'm sure you've heard about this little ditty in Expanded. Cross Division GX, put 10 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like. This Pokemon has at least 3 extra energy attached to it, put 20 damage counters on them instead. And this is really good in Archies, and then you use Dimension Valley Mew 3 to use Cross Division for its full effect for only 5 energy instead of 6. It's really bonkers. These combos were never meant to be had in Expanded. This is one of the most broken things that can happen in Expanded. Espeon EX, Miraculous Shine. I don't see this getting a lot of talk, but devolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and put the highest stage evolution card on it into your opponent's hand. If you have spread damage onto your opponent's Pokemon, namely Zoroark-GX's, and then they have evolved, and you can no longer snipe them with your damage spread attacks or your snipe attacks or what have you. You can just continue spreading with these Distortion Doors and then Miraculous Shine all of their Zoroarks. I think that's a very real possibility of a strategy if Zoroark decks like Zorotoad and Zoro Control and Zoro Garb are still viable, and you don't quite stop them from the early spread and early sniping. I have played against Zoro Control with Mew 3 Guardy, and still lost after knocking out 2 Zoruas on the first turn with Lost Boomerang, and they still can get set up with double Zorua Ditto, and start controlling you really well, and you've spread damage now, but they're on Zoroark-GXs, and you cannot finish those kills. But Miraculous Shine could get you there, and you can also just use Miraculous Shine. You don't have to copy it. So if you're ability locked and being like controlled, you can just get a single energy on an Espeon EX, not an Espeon Deoxys, on an Espeon EX and use the Miraculous Shine. Gengar Mimikyu is here mostly for its Poltergeist. It's an okay attack. You're taking a gamble, but there's big hands and a lot of trainers in Expanded. I'm not sure if there's any broken combos with Horror House right now. But Horror House, your opponent can't play any cards from their hand during their next turn if this Pokemon has at least 1 extra Psychic Energy attached to it. Each player draws cards until they have 7 cards in their hand. Horror House, I guess, could be used if your opponent started 1 basic Pokemon and didn't get anything else. And then you Horror House them and then Poltergeist them next turn, but I feel like in Expanded, if that happens, you're just winning anyway. Latios-GX, Tag Purge if you were playing against a mirror tag team deck, or if you wanted to stop your opponent from using GX attacks, but I'm not sure Clear Vision gets as much value in Expanded because there are so many good GX attacks that you want to utilize that I'm not sure stopping your opponents is as good. This Mewtwo EX with damage change, switch all damage counters on this Pokemon with those on your opponent's active Pokemon. This is better than Mirror Move. if your opponent's active Pokemon has no damage on it, and so you can fully heal yours and then move it all to your opponent's active Pokemon. It's a really, really cool kind of like pseudo strategy to have inside of your deck. It's not really a full game plan, but it is something to keep on the back burner for if that situation arises. Muck and Alolan Muck GX, the severe poison is pretty cool. Poison and 8 damage counters instead of 1 on that Pokemon between turns. Poison absorption 120 and heal 100 if that Pokemon's also poisoned. So you could go like Laser Burbank, poison absorption, heal yours and your opponent's at 150 after the Burbank poison. Maybe they're even asleep as well. Definitely not one of the strongest combos, but definitely viable at the very least. Sigilyph GX, it could be used as its own attacker because of its mirror counter ability, which reflects any GX and EX damage that it takes. The attacker also takes it as well. And then Intercept GX does 60 damage times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, so that can really knock out like a lot of the big attackers easily and expanded. Trevenant and Dusknoir. This is actually legal as of today, I believe. The Night Watch attack, 150. Choose 2 random cards from your opponent's hand. Your opponent reveals those cards and shuffles them into their deck. If this was Psychic colorless and Dimension Valley could make it only cost 2, I think this attack would actually be nuts. But it's not. You actually need 3 energy, so maybe Max Elixirs or like Ho-Ohs and then Energy Switch, or Rayquaza-GX and then Energy Switch, something like that. You could make a nasty hand lock with this, since you're shuffling 2 cards out of your opponent's hand each turn, whereas Unfair GX can only discard 2 cards once. I think Night Watch could be really dirty if you found some way to make it happen consistently. Pale Moon GX is kind of meh. At the end of your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon will be knocked out. If this Pokemon has at least 1 extra Psychic energy attached to it in addition to this attack's cost, discard all energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. I think that's probably not great and expanded because of the better GX attacks we have available, and then it's also not available. It's also not that great in standard. Because I feel like that just wouldn't stick most of the time, and there's also, you just want to blow things up right away in standard. So the Night Watch is what really interests me. Like I said, I think it would be broken if it was Psychic colorless. But definitely potential there. Mega Gallade EX is something I have not seen, and I really like it. I've not seen this mentioned, is what I should say. So you could do it for 2 energy in a Dimension Valley, 110, and let's say you're using this in the Mega Guardy deck where you've Distortion Doored to heck all of your opponent's Pokemon. This does 30 to each of them, so you're doing 110 and then 30. If they have 5 bench Pokemon, you can spread 150 to the bench and 110 on the active. That's 260 damage altogether, for just a possibility of 2 energy. And especially if you're going against something like Zoroark, and then you go with the Miraculous Shine from Espeon-EX that I mentioned, I think this has a lot of potential. I think damage spread in general has a lot of potential and expanded. Mega Gardevoir EX, I've been talking about this variant. This is the Spare Ray attack for Fairy colorless or just Fairy in a Dimension Valley. Mew 3 can copy it. It does 110, discard as many of your bench Pokemon as you like. These will be Tinas and Shaymins and Dedenes and things you don't want there anymore, and then the Tinas are reusable. This attack does 10 more damage for each bench Pokemon you discarded in this way. So the attack usually caps out at 160 in because you're not using Skyfield in these variants because you want to use Dimension Valley. So you're capping out at 160, usually 170 with a Fighting Fury belt, and you're doing a ton of damage to the bench each turn with the Distortion Doors. Mega Gengar EX, Phantom Gate, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. If there was a situation where one of your opponent's Pokemon's attacks were better than things that you had in your deck or could reasonably include in your deck, then maybe Phantom Gate is something good to include. I haven't necessarily seen a use for it yet. It's not currently in my decks, but I would say I'm probably only a quarter of the way done the testing that I'm going to eventually get done by Richmond. So Phantom Gate is definitely something to keep in mind if you come up against anything where you say to yourself, wow, I wish I could use my opponent's attack. Well, you could for just 2 energy in a Dimension Valley. And, oh, this Mega Gengar got added by accident. Whoopsie there. I will take this Mega Gengar out. And, so now this list is at 69 cards, guys. Surprise. 69 in the comments if you're a real one. So yeah, on to Naganadel-GX. So this is just here for the Stinger. I don't know if Stinger is as great and expanded as it is in Standard, especially if you're copying it with the Mewtwo Mew tag team. That's a tag team itself, so you're putting both people down to 3 prizes, and they could potentially knock out your Mewtwo and just end the game there before you can beat them. So I don't think this is as good and expanded as it is in Standard, but it's objectively a strong GX attack that should be mentioned. Naganadel-GX, the newer one with Venom Shot, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon and do 170 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. This is really good for sniping things on the bench. It's not as great and expanded again as it is in Standard, because in expanded you have Versus Seeker Guzma, and in Standard you do not have that. So you can more likely bring up things that you want to knock out, but 170 is a solid chunk of damage, and I don't think it's a bad inclusion at all if you want that option. Glaceon-EX, Crystal Ray, during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from evolution Pokemon. I don't think this is good anymore, but it's something that I wanted to put in here because Crystal Ray has been good in the past. In a meta of Zorogarb, it could potentially do some work, preventing their Zoroarks and their Garbodors from damaging your Mew 3. But I think Jolteon is just worlds better than Glaceon-EX is. Keldeo-GX could be used as its own attacker because of Pure Heart that prevents damage done by effects of attacks and damage done by EX and GX. But its Sonic Edge also goes through effects like that, so it could be copied by Mew 3 for 110. And then Resolute Blade does 50 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That's the same attack as Lycanroc-GX's Dangerous Rogue. But if you wanted the ability of Keldeo, the Sonic Edge to copy, and then the Resolute Blade GX all in one, then Keldeo's more efficient than Lycanroc. Kyurem-EX Glaciate. This attack does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. So this one is kind of like a weaker Mega Gallade if your opponent's bench is already damaged. But if your opponent's bench Pokemon are not already damaged, then Glaciate is better. As Mega Gallade does 30 to all of them that have damage, but it also attacks the active. This also hits the active, but it does 30, whereas Mega Gallade does 110. I think this is interesting, but if you're confident in the strategy and the consistency of the deck to always have those Distortion Doors down first, then I think Mega Gallade is probably always better than Kyurem-EX. Magikarp and Wailord-GX, this will just most likely be seen in the Archie's variants, but Mew 3, like I've said, is the main attacker now in Archie's variants, so Mew 3 will be copying Towering Splash for 8 energy, Super Splash for 5. Copying Kingdra GX is always better than Super Splash, and I have seen some lists just omitting Magikarp and Wailord's Towering Splash in favor of Cross Divide, so we might see Magikarp and Wailord get pushed out of popularity in this current meta. Seismitoad-EX. Quaking Punch is really what it's here for. Your opponent can't play any item cards from his or her hand during his or her next turn. This is a worse Distort, since Distort on Noivern does 50 for a dark and a colorless. Except for this, you don't need dark energy. You could just use a colorless in a Dimension Valley or a DCE, or you can just attack with Toad itself, which you cannot do with Noivern since we don't play its pre-evolution to actually get it onto the board. So if Quaking Punching with the Toad is appealing to you, maybe if you're worried about ability lock or labs or whatever, and you just want to keep your item lock going. Seismitoad-EX is probably the better choice for you as opposed to Noivern. Tapu Fini GX I've included here for its Tapu Storm. Shuffle your opponent's active Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. I'm not sure if this is worth it in Expanded, but definitely a viable option to have around. And keep in mind, if any matchups you come across seem like this could help you, then Tapu Storm might be the thing for you. Alola Ninetales-GX Ice Path, move all damage counters from this Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. This does the same thing as Damage Change, except you don't swap the damage counter, so you don't get what they had onto your Mewtwo. You just move yours onto theirs, and you can do this for just an energy and a Dimension Valley. Dimension Valley's a pretty big deal in Expanded. If you haven't noticed, I've been talking about it this entire video. Glaceon GX's not Freezing Gaze, it's Polar Spear for just an Rainbow or Prism and then another energy in a Dimension Valley. Does 50 damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So if it's just damaged, like 4 damage counters on the defending Pokemon, makes this attack do 200. 5 damage counters on it makes it do 250. So you're knocking out most things with Polar Spear. Frost Bullet is also a reasonable attack for 2 energy, 90 and 30, but worse than Mega Gallade if things are already, if you've already spread damage onto things. Sylveon-GX, its Pidgeot-EX is pretty interesting. Put 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and all cards attached to them into your opponent's hand. You could maybe Guzma up something like a Shaman in the Archie's matchup, and then Pidgeot-EX their Archies and then their Mew 3 that had all the energy into their hand, and if they can't get all that energy and stuff out of their hand, they're not going to be able to Archies, right? So then you probably just lock them out of the game from there. And Magical Ribbon, search your deck for 3 cards. It's probably not that great in Expanded, but it's definitely there if it comes up and you need it. Blastoise-GX, I'm not a huge fan of this, but some people have said maybe this could be okay in an Archie's Mew deck. Shuffle any amount of water energy from your Pokemon into your deck, and it does 60 damage for each card you shuffled in this way. Shuffling 4 energy rather is going to be 240 damage. Shuffling 5 energy is going to be 300. It's a ton of damage, and you can serve the energy in an Archie's deck. So maybe it could be okay, but I think Kingdra is probably the safer bet. Greninja-GX can be used for its Haze Slash. You may shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck for 110. If you're copying this for just 2 energy and you have another energy on a bench Mew 3, then you can just chain Mew 3s and swing 110 and consistently heal by shuffling in. Kingdra-GX, like I mentioned, this is popular in the Archie's decks right now since Hydro Pump is so good to copy with Mew 3. This attack does 50 more damage times the amount of water energy attached to this Pokemon, so 5 energy attached, you're doing 260. That's a lot. And Maelstrom-GX, this attack does 40 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. A really, really good spread attack here, actually. But the problem is Mew 3 stops spread attacks like this. I'm sorry, Mew, the bench barrier, or Mr. Mime, the bench barrier, stops spread attacks like this, but it does not stop spread attacks like Espeon Deoxys' Cross Divide. And that is the last card in this list. Like I mentioned, I did include not a different art. I included a second Mega Gengar there, so it's actually 69 cards in this list that I have for you guys. And I will export this into a Google Sheet and put the link in the description below. Or I'll just export the list into the description below. And you guys can put this into your PTCGO if you'd like the list around for your own perusal when you are deck building Mew 3 variants in the expanded format. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what the spiciest card in this list is, in your opinion, for Mew 3 decks. And if I've missed any GXs, EXs, or Megas that you would like to copy with Mew 3, please let me know that as well in the comments below. Check out flipsidegaming.com and use code CELIO for 10% off of your next order, $10 or more. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.